Jasmine Taylor stood before the brownstone in Brooklyn Heights, her heart full of hope. The quaint pre-war building housed the apartment of her dreams, a small but charming space where she could envision building her future as a law student. Taking a deep breath, she rang the doorbell, ready to meet Mr. Henderson, the landlord. The door creaked open, revealing a middle-aged man with salt and pepper hair. Mr. Henderson's welcoming smile faltered as his gaze fell upon Jasmine's dark skin and natural curls. His eyes narrowed, scrutinizing her from head to toe. "You're here about the apartment?" he asked, his tone laced with skepticism. Jasmine nodded eagerly. "Yes, I'm very interested. I'm starting law school at—" "I'm afraid the apartment's no longer available," Mr. Henderson interrupted, his voice clipped. "It was just rented this morning. Sorry for the inconvenience." The door shut abruptly, leaving Jasmine stunned on the stoop. As she descended the steps, the weight of what had just happened settled on her shoulders. It wasn't the first time she'd faced such blatant discrimination, but it stung nonetheless. Later that evening, Jasmine poured out her frustrations to her best friend, Olivia, over coffee at their favorite diner. "It's like no matter how hard I work or how qualified I am, some people will only ever see the color of my skin," Jasmine said, her voice tight with emotion. Olivia reached across the table, squeezing Jasmine's hand. "I'm so sorry, Jazz. It's not fair, and it's not right, but you can't let them win. You're going to change things. I know it." Jasmine managed a small smile, grateful for her friend's support. As she sipped her coffee, she couldn't shake the feeling that this rejection was just the beginning of a much bigger journey. The following weekend, Jasmine visited her grandmother, Judge Eleanor Taylor, in her stately home in Harlem. As soon as Jasmine stepped through the door, Eleanor enveloped her in a warm embrace, the scent of cinnamon and wisdom enveloping them both. "There's my future legal eagle," Eleanor said, her eyes twinkling with pride. "Come on in. I've got some sweet potato pie that needs eating." As they settled in the cozy kitchen, Jasmine recounted her experience with Mr. Henderson. Eleanor listened intently, her expression a mix of sympathy and determination. "Oh, baby girl," Eleanor sighed. "I wish I could say I'm surprised, but we've still got a long way to go. But let me tell you something. Every no you hear is just fuel for the fire that's going to light up this world." Eleanor shared stories from her own career, tales of courtroom battles against discrimination that had Jasmine hanging on every word. She spoke of allies found in unexpected places and the importance of perseverance in the face of adversity. "You've got to remember, Jasmine," Eleanor said, leaning forward. "Change doesn't happen overnight. It's a slow burn, but it's unstoppable once it starts." Inspired by her grandmother's words, Jasmine decided to join a student group focused on social justice at her law school. The first meeting she attended was eye-opening, filled with passionate discussions about inequality and strategies for change. As she left her grandmother's house that evening, Jasmine felt a renewed sense of purpose. She might not have gotten that apartment, but she'd gained something far more valuable, a connection to her roots and a roadmap for the future. Energized by her grandmother's encouragement and her new involvement in the student group, Jasmine threw herself into organizing a campus-wide awareness campaign about housing discrimination. She plastered the law school with posters, set up information booths, and coordinated a series of guest speakers to address the pervasive issue of racial bias in housing. Her enthusiasm was infectious, drawing in students from various backgrounds who shared their own experiences with discrimination. The campaign gained momentum, catching the attention of local media and sparking conversations across campus about systemic racism and the need for change. However, not everyone was receptive to Jasmine's message. During a faculty meeting where she presented her ideas for incorporating more diversity and inclusion training into the curriculum, Professor Whitman, a tenured faculty member, dismissed her concerns. "Ms. Taylor," he said with a condescending smile, "while your enthusiasm is admirable, I think you're making mountains out of molehills. The law is colorblind. After all." Jasmine felt her cheeks burn with anger and embarrassment as other faculty members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. For a moment, She considered backing down, but then she remembered her grandmother's words about perseverance. Taking a deep breath, Jasmine straightened her shoulders and looked Professor Whitman in the eye. "With all due respect, sir, the law may be colorblind, but the people who interpret and enforce it are not. If we don't address these biases head-on, we're failing in our duty as legal professionals." Her words hung in the air, and to her surprise, several other faculty members nodded in agreement. The dean, Dr. Martinez, cleared her throat. "I think Mrs. Taylor has raised some valid points. Perhaps it's time we review our curriculum." As the meeting adjourned, Jasmine felt a mix of exhaustion and exhilaration. She had stood her ground, and people had listened. It was a small victory, but an important one. The fight for justice was far from over, but Jasmine was ready for the challenge. Weeks passed, and Jasmine's campaign continued to gain traction. Local news outlets picked up the story, featuring interviews with students and community members affected by housing discrimination. One evening, as Jasmine was wrapping up a community forum, she noticed a familiar face in the back of the room, Mr. Henderson. The landlord approached her after the event, his demeanor markedly different from their first encounter. "Ms. Taylor," he began, his voice hesitant. I owe you an apology." Jasmine was taken aback, but listened as Mr. Henderson explained how the campaign had forced him to confront his own biases. "My grandparents were Italian immigrants," he revealed. "They faced discrimination when they first came to this country. I should have known better than to perpetuate that cycle." Their conversation was awkward at first, but as they talked, Jasmine saw genuine remorse in Mr. Henderson's eyes. He shared stories of his family's struggles and how they had shaped his worldview, for better and worse. "I can't change what I did," Mr. Henderson said, "but I want to make it right. I've been thinking about ways to make my properties more inclusive. Would you be willing to help me develop a fair housing plan?" Jasmine was hesitant, the sting of rejection still fresh, but she recognized the importance of this moment, a chance to create real change from an unexpected source. "I appreciate your honesty, Mr. Henderson," Jasmine replied carefully. "I think there's a lot we could accomplish if we work together. Why don't we start with a cup of coffee and go from there?" As they exchanged contact information, Jasmine felt a glimmer of hope. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a step towards understanding, and maybe, just maybe, the beginning of real change in their community. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of activity for Jasmine. She found herself juggling her law school studies with her growing role as a community organizer. The partnership with Mr. Henderson, while unexpected, opened doors she hadn't anticipated. Together, they organized a series of workshops on fair housing practices, inviting landlords, tenants, and community members to engage in open dialogues about discrimination and inclusivity. The first workshop was tense, with skeptics on both sides eyeing each other warily. Jasmine stood at the front of the room, her heart pounding. "I know many of you are wondering why you're here," she began. "Some of you may even resent being asked to come, but the fact is, we all have a stake in creating a fair and equitable community, and that starts with understanding each other." As the workshop progressed, Jasmine was amazed to see barriers start to crumble. An elderly white landlord shared how his perspective had changed after his granddaughter married a black man. A young Hispanic couple recounted their struggles finding housing, moving many in the room to tears. Mr. Henderson, true to his word, became an advocate for change. He shared his own journey of confronting his biases, encouraging other landlords to do the same. "It's not easy to admit when you're wrong," he said, "but it's necessary if we want to move forward." By the end of the workshop series, a transformation was evident. Landlords pledged to review their rental practices, and tenants formed support networks. Jasmine watched in awe as people who had once eyed each other with suspicion now exchanged phone numbers and handshakes. As she packed up after the final session, Mr. Henderson approached her. "You know, Jasmine," he said with a smile, "I think we're on to something big here. This is just the beginning." Jasmine nodded, feeling a surge of hope. "You're right," she replied. "And it's just the beginning." As Jasmine's community work gained recognition, she faced new challenges at law school. Her involvement in social justice causes had not gone unnoticed, and not everyone was supportive of her extracurricular activities. During a constitutional law class, Professor Whitman, still skeptical of Jasmine's efforts, posed a hypothetical case involving housing discrimination. "Ms. Taylor," he said, his tone sharp, "given your expertise in this area, how would you argue this case?" Jasmine felt all eyes turned to her. She knew this was more than just a classroom exercise. It was a test. Taking a deep breath, she began to outline her argument, drawing on both legal precedent and her recent experiences. As she spoke, she could see Professor Whitman's expression shift from dismissive to thoughtful. Other students began to chime in, building on Jasmine's points and relating them to other areas of law. Suddenly, the classroom was alive with debate. Students who had never spoken up before were sharing their own experiences with discrimination, connecting them to the legal concepts they were studying. At the end of the class, Professor Whitman approached Jasmine. "That was impressive, Miss Taylor," he admitted grudgingly. "Perhaps there's more to this than I initially thought." Encouraged by this small victory, Jasmine threw herself into her studies with renewed vigor. She began to see how her community work and her legal education complemented each other, each informing and strengthening the other. Her efforts didn't go unnoticed. A few weeks later, Jasmine was surprised to receive an invitation to present her work at a national law conference focused on civil rights and social justice. As she shared the news with her study group, her friend Marcus grinned. "You're changing minds, Jazz," he said, one classroom at a time. Jasmine smiled, feeling a mix of pride and determination. The road ahead was still long, but she was making progress, step by step, argument by argument. The impact of Jasmine and Mr. Henderson's workshops rippled through the community. What had started as a series of discussions about fair housing practices had evolved into a broader movement for neighborhood unity and understanding. Inspired by their success, Jasmine and Mr. Henderson organized a community festival celebrating diversity. The event drew residents from all corners of the neighborhood, filling the local park with the sounds of various languages, music, and laughter. Food stalls offered cuisines from around the world, local artists showcased their work, and a stage hosted performances ranging from spoken word poetry to traditional dances. But the heart of the festival was the story-sharing tent, where residents could record their experiences and listen to others. Jasmine watched in awe as people who might never have spoken to each other engaged in deep conversations. She overheard an elderly black resident sharing stories of the civil rights movement with a group of wide-eyed teenagers. Nearby, a recent immigrant from Syria was teaching a curious crowd how to write their names in Arabic. Mr. Henderson, who had once been so resistant to change, was now in his element. He moved from group to group, introducing people and encouraging connections. At one point, he pulled Jasmine aside, his eyes shining. "I never imagined our community could be like this," he said. "Thank you for opening my eyes." As the sun began to set, Jasmine took to the stage to address the crowd. Looking out at the sea of diverse faces, all united in celebration, she felt a surge of emotion. "This," she said, her voice carrying across the park, "this is what community looks like. This is what America can be when we open our hearts and minds to each other. Let's carry this spirit forward." She realized that she had not only changed her community had changed her, expanding her vision of what was possible when people came together across differences. As Jasmine's final year of law school approached, she received an offer for a prestigious internship at Goldstein Associates, one of New York's top corporate law firms. It was an opportunity many of her classmates would kill for, promising valuable experience and connections. However, Jasmine's excitement quickly faded as she settled into the firm's culture. The sleek offices and designer suits couldn't mask the undercurrent of prejudice she encountered. She noticed how partners would sometimes mistake her for support staff, or how her ideas in meetings were often overlooked until a white colleague repeated them. One afternoon, Jasmine overheard two associates discussing a pro bono case involving a low-income housing dispute. Their dismissive attitudes and casual use of racial stereotypes made her blood boil. That night, Jasmine tossed and turned, wrestling with her conscience. She had worked so hard to get this opportunity, but how could she be part of a system that perpetuated the very injustices she had been fighting against? The next day, Jasmine decided to take action. She approached her supervisor, Ms. Roberts, and proposed that the firm take on more civil rights cases and implement diversity training for all staff. Ms. Roberts listened politely, but seemed skeptical. "Jasmine," she said, "I appreciate your enthusiasm, but we're a corporate firm. Our clients expect a certain image. Maybe you'd be happier at a public interest organization?" Jasmine left the meeting feeling deflated but not defeated. She remembered her grandmother's words about change being a slow burn. If she left, nothing would change. But if she stayed and fought, that evening, Jasmine reached out to her network of activists and law school classmates. Together, they began to strategize ways to push for change from within the legal establishment. As she worked late into the night, Jasmine felt a familiar fire rekindling within her. The path ahead would be challenging, but she was ready to take it on, armed with the lessons she had learned and the community she had built. Over the next few months, Jasmine worked tirelessly to bring about change at Goldstein Associates. She organized informal lunch and learn sessions, inviting speakers from various backgrounds to share their experiences with discrimination in the legal field. Slowly but surely, she began to build a coalition of like-minded colleagues. Her efforts caught the attention of James Chen, a junior partner known for his progressive views. With his support, Jasmine prepared a comprehensive report on the benefits of diversity and inclusion in law firms, backed by data and case studies. The day of her presentation to the firm's executive committee arrived. Jasmine stood before the room of senior partners, her heart pounding but her voice steady. "Gentlemen," she began, noting the lack of diversity in the room itself, "what I'm about to present isn't just about doing the right thing. It's about the future of our firm and the legal profession as a whole." As she spoke, Jasmine could see the partners' expressions change from skepticism to interest. She presented case studies of firms that had improved their bottom line through diverse hiring practices and inclusive policies. She shared anonymous stories from employees who had faced discrimination, highlighting the talent the firm was at risk of losing. When she finished, there was a moment of silence. Then, to her surprise, Mr. Goldstein himself spoke up. "Miss Taylor," he said, "I've been practicing law for over 40 years, and I've never heard the case for diversity presented quite like this. I think it's time we seriously consider implementing these changes." The room erupted in discussion. Some partners were enthusiastic, others skeptical, but all were engaged. As the meeting adjourned, Jasmine felt a mix of exhaustion and exhilaration. She had opened the door, but the real work was just beginning. Over the next few weeks, Jasmine worked closely with Mr. Chen and a newly formed diversity committee to draft new policies. They established mentorship programs for minority associates, set diversity hiring goals, and implemented mandatory unconscious bias training for all employees. The changes weren't always smooth. Some employees resisted, arguing that the new policies were unfair or unnecessary. But Jasmine persevered, drawing on the skills she had honed in her community, organizing work to build consensus and address concerns. One afternoon, as Jasmine was leaving the office, she ran into Mr. Henderson in the lobby. He had come to meet with the firm about expanding affordable housing in their real estate developments. Seeing Jasmine in her professional attire, working at a top law firm, he smiled broadly. "Look at you," he said warmly. "From challenging me about that apartment to changing one of the biggest law firms in the city, you're really making waves, Jasmine." Jasmine smiled back, realizing how far they had both come. "It's not just me," she replied. "It's all of us, working together. That makes the real difference." As she headed home that evening, Jasmine felt a sense of accomplishment. The fight was far from over, but she had proven that change was possible, even in the most established institutions. A year after Jasmine's groundbreaking presentation, Goldstein Associates had undergone a remarkable transformation. The firm had not only implemented Jasmine's suggested policies, but had become a leader in promoting diversity and inclusion in the legal field. Jasmine, now a full-time associate at the firm, was invited to speak at the annual Civil Rights Law Conference. As she stood at the podium, looking out at a sea of faces, young and old, of all races and backgrounds, she felt a surge of emotion. "When I started this journey," she began, "I was just a law student angry about being denied an apartment. I never imagined it would lead me here. In every interaction we have with one another." She shared stories of the community festival, of the changes at Goldstein Associates, of the ripple effects she had seen throughout the city. As she spoke, she noticed Mr. Henderson in the audience, nodding along with tears in his eyes. After her speech, Mr. Henderson approached her. "Jasmine," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "I have some news. I've decided to run for city council. Your work inspired me to take a more active role in making our city a fairer place for everyone." Jasmine was stunned. "Mr. Henderson? That's amazing. You've come so far from when we first met." He smiled ruefully. "We both have. And please, call me Tom. I think after everything we've been through, we're well past formalities." As the conference wound down, Jasmine found herself surrounded by young law students, eager to learn from her experiences. She saw in their eyes the same fire she had felt when she first started this journey. Later that evening, Jasmine called her grandmother to share the day's events. "You were right, Grandma," she said. "Change is a slow burn, but once it starts, it's unstoppable." Eleanor's warm chuckle came through the phone. "I'm so proud of you, baby girl. You're not just walking in my footsteps, you're blazing a whole new trail." As Jasmine hung up the phone, she looked out her window at the city skyline. The path ahead was still long, with many challenges to face. But she was no longer alone in the fight. She had built a community, changed minds, and started a movement. Tomorrow would bring new battles, new opportunities for change. And Jasmine Taylor, with her roots of hope firmly planted, was ready to face them all.
Disclaimer: this channel does not support or tolerate any form of discrimination, racism, prejudice, or violation of human rights. The stories presented here are original and created by the author with the aim of promoting reflection, awareness, and dialogue. All content is developed with respect for diversity and the dignity of all people.